Why would a king bury his own son in darkness? You stand in the cold, damp cellar of Versailles, 1710, where the boy's almond-shaped eyes hide unspeakable secrets. Stay with us to uncover them. You feel the heavy silence in this forgotten corner of the glittering palace, where the light from crystal chandeliers never reaches. The air is damp, carrying the scent of cold stone and secrets. Somewhere in the shadows, the drip of water echoes, each drop a quiet reminder of time slipping away. You imagine the boy, known only as the man in the mask, sitting on a thin bed of straw, his frail frame wrapped in a tattered cloak. His eyes, sharp and searching, hold a story no one dares to tell. Inside his mind, a storm is trapped in a glass jar. He doesn't know his name, or if he ever had one. His earliest memory is the clank of a lock, the cold voice of a guard. Silence if you know what's good for you. Yet in his head he builds a fragile sanctuary, a field of grass under a sky with no bars. You sense his resilience, a spark of defiance against erasure. Who was he before the mask? A prince, perhaps? Or just a cursed name, buried to protect a king's pride? The question lingers like a bruise on your heart, hinting at the horrors still to be revealed. You hear footsteps. Marie, a servant with rough hands and gentle eyes, approaches the bars. She slips a tin plate of bread and cheese through the gap, quick but tender. "Eat, boy," she whispers, her voice a thread of warmth in the cold. He hesitates, then takes the plate, his fingers brushing hers. "Why do you help me?" he asks, his voice so small it's as if speaking might shatter him. Marie presses her lips together. "Because someone must," she replies, glancing nervously down the corridor. This brief exchange is a spark of connection, a quiet rebellion against the king's decree that this boy does not exist. But what other secrets hide behind her kindness? You wonder if she knows something far more terrible. The moment is haunting, an almost dreamlike cellar, the iron bars casting jagged shadows across the boy's pale face. His gray cloak blends into the stone walls, as if he's becoming part of the prison itself. Marie's coarse dress glimmers faintly in the torchlight, a soft contrast to the cold blue-gray of the setting. Her footsteps, light, cautious, mingle with the distant murmur of a Versailles banquet, a cruel reminder of the world beyond. Somewhere, a cello plays a mournful melody, each note heavy with loss. Then a flicker of lightness. Marie lingers a moment too long, murmuring, "That new wig the king's wearing looks like a sheep caught in a storm." The boy's lips twitch. Just for a second, a smile cracks through his guarded expression. You feel the warmth of shared humor, a tiny rebellion against the suffocating rules of the palace. But tension seeps back in. A shadow, Jacques, the guard, appears at the end of the hall. Marie freezes, her eyes darting to the boy. "Hide the plate," she whispers urgently. He shoves it beneath his cloak, his heart pounding as Jacques' boots draw nearer. You hold your breath, caught in his fear of discovery. What greater horror waits beyond these walls? You pause to reflect. What does it mean to be erased? When your name, your story, are stripped away until you're just a ghost in your own life. The boy's existence becomes a metaphor for identity, a fragile thread easily severed by power. Yet in Marie's small act of defiance, there's a whisper of healing, a reminder that even in darkness, humanity survives. Have you ever witnessed such small acts of rebellion, where kindness rises against cruelty? The terrible secrets of this prince still wait to be uncovered, Stay until the end of the video to find out. Mantra. Some names are too dangerous to speak. You walk the opulent halls of Versailles, 1710, where golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors, but their light feels hollow, a facade hiding a darker truth. You imagine the boy, the nameless prince, locked in a chamber far below these glittering corridors. His world is not this polished splendor, but a damp, shadowed cell where the air tastes of mildew. You feel his isolation, a weight that presses against his chest, as if the palace itself is a living thing, swallowing his existence. His thoughts are a tangle of questions. Why am I here? What sin did I commit by being born? His almond-shaped eyes trace the cracks in the stone walls, searching for answers that never come. Above, the court buzzes with laughter and clinking goblets, but you sense the boy's absence like a missing note in a symphony. He knows of the world beyond, snatches of music, the scent of roasted pheasant carried by drafts. But it's a world he cannot touch. His only visitors are Marie, the servant who risks her safety to feed him, and a stern guard named Jacques, whose cold efficiency masks a flicker of unease. Jacques never speaks, but his heavy keys jangle with every step, a sound that haunts the boy's dreams. You imagine the boy pressing his ear to the wall, trying to catch fragments of life beyond his bars, his heart aching for a name he cannot recall. Picture a moment of conflict. Marie, her face lined with worry, kneels by the cell's bars. "You must eat more," she urges, pushing a small apple through. The boy shakes his head, his voice sharp with frustration. "Why? So I can live longer in this cage?" Marie's eyes glisten, but she holds his gaze. "Because you're more than their secret," she says fiercely. The words hang between them, a spark of defiance. But Jacques' boots echo nearby, cutting the moment short. You feel the boy's pulse quicken, his hands trembling as he hides the apple, fearing punishment. The scene is vivid. The cell's dim torchlight flickers, casting long shadows that dance like specters on the walls. The boy's cloak is tattered, its edges frayed, blending with the gray stone. Marie's apron, stained but neatly tied, catches a faint gleam, a symbol of her quiet rebellion. The distant sound of a harpsichord from the court above weaves through the scene, clashing with the low hum of a bassoon, its tone heavy with foreboding. The contrast between the palace's extravagance and the cell's austerity is stark, a visual reminder of the boy's erasure. Now, a spark of humor breaks the gloom. Marie, in a rare moment of levity, mimics Jacques' stiff march, puffing out her chest. "He thinks he guards a dragon, not a boy," she whispers. The boy's lips curve, a fleeting laugh escaping before he catches himself, wary of being heard. But tension follows swiftly. Jacques appears, his face a mask of suspicion. "What's that noise?" he barks, his hand on his sword. The boy freezes, his breath shallow, as Marie slips into the shadows, her heart pounding as loudly as yours. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to be a prisoner of someone else's shame? The boy's cell is more than stone. It's a metaphor for identity locked away, hidden to protect a king's legacy. Yet, Marie's small acts of care, her whispered words, offer a healing thread, a reminder that even in confinement, connection can endure. Have you ever felt trapped by someone else's expectations, your true self buried? What's behind the mask of this prince, and who dares to keep him hidden? Share your thoughts below. Mantra. Even gold can hide a prison. You stand in the grand shadow of King Louis XIV, the Sun King, his presence as radiant and unyielding as the Versailles sun. But you feel a chill, a darkness cast not by light, but by his command. In a hidden chamber far below, the nameless prince sits, his almond-shaped eyes fixed on a sliver of daylight creeping through a high, barred window. His inner world is a labyrinth of loss, where memories of a mother's voice, soft, fleeting, clash with the cold reality of his erased name. You sense his heart, a fragile ember, struggling to burn beneath the weight of royal decree. Why must he be forgotten? What truth does his existence threaten? The boy's only companions are fleeting. Marie, the servant who brings him food, and Jacques, the guard whose silence is as heavy as the iron bars. But today, you imagine Louis himself, a figure of myth and menace, his motives cloaked in power. The boy has heard whispers of the king, his father, perhaps, through Marie's cautious tales. Louis ordered his confinement, his name struck from records, as if he were a stain on the crown. The boy's thoughts churn. Am I a threat? A shame? Or merely a ghost to be buried? A tense scene unfolds. Jacques, his face rigid, delivers a rare message from the court. The king knows you're still here, he says, his voice low, eyes avoiding the boy's. The prince stands, his thin frame trembling. Why does he hate me? He asks, his words sharp with years of pent-up pain. Jacques hesitates, his loyalty to the king warring with a flicker of pity. Some truths are too heavy for the throne, he mutters, turning away. The boy's fists clench, his eyes burning with a question he cannot voice. Who am I? The visual is stark. The cell is bathed in cold, gray light, the barred window casting a lattice of shadows across the boy's face. His cloak, now patched, hangs loosely on his frame, a symbol of his fading identity. Jacques' polished boots and crimson uniform stand in sharp contrast, a reminder of the world above. The soundscape is haunting. A distant church bell tolls, its somber notes blending with the creak of the cell's iron door. A soft violin hums faintly, carrying the weight of unspoken grief. A moment of lightness pierces the gloom. Marie, slipping in with a crust of bread, notices the boy's untouched plate. You're wasting my best smuggling skills, she teases, her eyes twinkling. The boy manages a faint chuckle, a spark of warmth in the cold. But the humor fades as Jacques returns, his face darker now. No more talk, he snaps, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. You feel the boy's pulse race, his body shrinking against the wall, the air thick with the threat of discovery. Reflecting on this, you wonder, what does it mean to be erased by someone else's power? The boy's confinement is a metaphor for identity, as a flame snuffed out by fear. Fear of truth, fear of shame. Yet, in his quiet resistance, in the way he clings to the echo of a mother's voice, there's a healing flicker. It reminds you that even under tyranny, the human spirit seeks light. Have you ever felt silenced by someone else's control? How do you hold on to your own truth when the world demands your silence? Mantra. Power can erase a child's name. You linger in the shadows of Versailles, 1710, where the air hums with the distant clatter of banquet plates and the soft rustle of silk gowns. But you feel a pull downward, to the hidden cell where the nameless prince sits, his almond-shaped eyes tracing faint scratches on the stone wall, marks of days, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to hold on to himself. His heart is a tethered bird, wings clipped by years of confinement, yet fluttering with a stubborn will to exist. You sense his quiet rebellion, a refusal to let his spirit dissolve into the damp stone. Who could he have been, if not for the king's decree? A scholar, a poet, or simply a boy, free to run under the sun? Marie, the servant with kind eyes and calloused hands, is his lifeline. She risks everything, her safety, her place in the palace, to bring him scraps of food and fleeting moments of warmth. Jacques, the guard, looms as a silent enforcer, his loyalty to King Louis XIV unwavering, yet his eyes betray a flicker of unease when they meet the boys. You imagine the prince's thoughts spiraling. Why does Marie care? Why does Jacques never speak my name? His identity is a shadow, swallowed by the palace's gilded lies, but Marie's presence is a candle in the dark. A scene of conflict unfolds. Marie kneels by the bars, her voice low but urgent. "You're stronger than this place," she says, passing a small loaf of bread. The boy's eyes flash with frustration. "Strong? I'm nothing here," he snaps, his voice cracking like brittle glass. Marie leans closer, her words fierce. "You're alive. That's enough." Their exchange is cut short by Jacques' heavy footsteps. "Move along, woman," he growls, his hand resting on his sword. Marie stands, defiant for a moment, then slips away, leaving the boy clutching the bread, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The visual is haunting. The cell's dim glow comes from a single torch, its flame flickering as if struggling to breathe. The prince's face, half lit, shows the sharp angles of hunger, his cloak a patchwork of grays blending with the stone. Marie's apron, worn but clean, catches the light, a quiet symbol of her care. Jacques' crimson uniform stands stark against the gloom, his shadow looming large. The soundscape weaves a distant lute from the court above with the soft scrape of Marie's shoes and the ominous jangle of Jacques' keys. A low, resonant viola underscores the scene, its notes heavy with longing. A moment of lightness breaks through. Marie, lingering a moment longer, whispers, "Jacques polishes his boots more than the king's mirrors." The prince's lips twitch, a rare chuckle escaping, a fleeting defiance against the weight of his world. But tension returns as Jacques pauses, his head tilting as if he heard. "Quiet in there," he barks, his voice sharp enough to cut. You feel the boy's breath catch, his body pressing against the wall, the bread hidden under his cloak as fear coils in his chest. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to carry someone else's secret? The prince's life is a metaphor for identity as a fragile seed, buried under the weight of power, yet still reaching for light. Marie's loyalty, her whispered words, are a healing thread, stitching together the boy's fraying sense of self. Have you ever known someone who risked something for you, quietly, without reward? Their courage, like Marie's, is a reminder that even in the darkest corners, humanity can bloom. Share a story of silent loyalty below, and let's uncover more of this hidden prince's tale. Mantra. Kindness shines in the darkest corners. You tread softly through the shadowed underbelly of Versailles, 1710, where the air is thick with the scent of wax and stone. Above, the court glitters with laughter and the clink of crystal, but you feel the weight of a hidden truth pulling you downward. In a cramped cell, the nameless prince sits, his almond-shaped eyes catching a faint gleam from a torch. His heart is a tethered star, dimmed by years of confinement, yet pulsing with a quiet defiance. You imagine his thoughts, a swirl of fragmented dreams, open fields, a name he can't grasp, a life stolen by royal decree. Who could he have been if not for this cage? Marie, the servant with gentle hands, remains his anchor, sneaking him food despite the risk. Jacques, the guard, patrols with a stern face, his keys a constant reminder of the boy's captivity. But you sense a shift in the prince's spirit, a spark of resistance growing stronger. He scratches faint lines into the stone, not just to mark time but to claim a piece of himself. His identity, though buried, is a seed refusing to die, pushing through the cracks of the palace's lies. A scene of conflict unfolds. Marie, her face etched with worry, passes a small bundle of cloth through the bars. "Keep this hidden," she whispers, her voice urgent. The prince unfolds it to find a scrap of embroidered fabric, a flower, faded but vibrant. "Why give me this?" he asks, his tone sharp with suspicion. "To remind you you're human," Marie replies, her eyes fierce with conviction. Their moment is shattered by Jacques' voice, cold and commanding. "No gifts," he snaps, stepping closer. The prince tucks the cloth under his cloak, his heart racing as Jacques' gaze lingers, heavy with suspicion. The visual is vivid. The cell's torchlight flickers, casting jagged shadows across the prince's pale face, his eyes bright with a mix of fear and resolve. The embroidered flower, a soft red against the gray stone, glows like a memory of life. Marie's worn apron and Jacques' polished boots contrast sharply, symbols of care and control. The soundscape blends the distant trill of a flute from the court, with the soft rustle of the cloth and the ominous clank of Jacques' keys. A gentle harp underscores the scene, its notes delicate but heavy with hope. Now a spark of humor lights the darkness. Marie, lingering a moment, smirks. "Jacques thinks his boots scare the rats away," she whispers, mimicking his stiff march. The prince's shoulders shake with a silent laugh, a rare moment of lightness that feels like a stolen breath. But tension surges as Jacques turns sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What's so funny?" he demands, his hand gripping the bars. You feel the prince's pulse spike, his fingers tightening around the hidden cloth, as Marie slips into the shadows, her breath held. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to find light in a place of despair? The prince's laugh, fleeting as it is a metaphor for resilience, a single note of defiance against a symphony of silence. Marie's gift, a scrap of beauty, is a healing thread, weaving hope into the boy's fraying world. Have you ever found a moment of lightness in your darkest times? A small act that reminded you of your own strength? Share that spark below, and let's uncover how this prince holds on to his humanity. Mantra. Laughter can pierce the heaviest chains. You stand in the dim, suffocating stillness of Versailles' underbelly, 1710, where the air feels like a held breath, heavy with secrets. The distant hum of the court's revelry, lutes and laughter, fades into a faint echo, drowned by the damp chill of stone walls. You imagine the nameless prince, his almond-shaped eyes fixed on the faint scratches he's carved into his cell's floor, each mark a silent scream against his erasure. His heart is a sunken ship, its wreckage buried under years of confinement, yet there's a current of defiance stirring within. You feel his inner struggle, a battle to hold on to a self he cannot name. What does it mean to exist when no one acknowledges you? Marie, The servant with weathered hands remains his quiet savior, slipping him food and fragments of hope. Jacques, the guard, patrols with mechanical precision, his silence louder than words, though his eyes betray a flicker of unease when they meet the boys. You sense the prince's thoughts spiraling. Why am I less than a shadow? What truth is so dangerous that I must be erased? His identity is a ghost, haunting the edges of his mind. But each mark he carves is a claim to existence, a refusal to vanish completely. A scene of conflict unfolds. Marie, her face taut with fear, kneels by the bars. "You're still here," she whispers, her voice barely audible as she slides a small crust of bread through. The prince's eyes darken. "Here, but not alive," he mutters, his voice raw with years of swallowed words. Marie's hand trembles, but she holds his gaze. "Your heart still beats. That's enough." Jacques' boots echo closer, cutting their words short. "Enough whispering," he barks, his tone sharp but unsteady, as if he fears what he might overhear. The prince shrinks back, clutching the bread, his breath shallow as the guard's shadow looms. The visual is stark. The cell's torchlight casts a sickly glow, illuminating the prince's gaunt face and the faint scratches on the floor, each line a testament to his endurance. His cloak, threadbare and gray, blends with the stone, making him seem half-faded. Marie's apron, stained but neatly tied, catches a sliver of light, a beacon of care. Jacques' crimson uniform stands out, a harsh contrast, his keys glinting like a warning. The soundscape weaves the distant clink of goblets from the court, with the soft scrape of the prince's scratches and the heavy tread of Jacques' boots. A low, mournful oboe hums, its notes heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. A moment of lightness flickers. Marie, risking a smile, whispers, "Jacques' keys jangle louder than the court's bells." The prince's lips twitch, a faint chuckle breaking through, a spark of rebellion against the silence. But tension crashes in as Jacques pauses, his head tilting sharply. "No noise!" he snaps, his hand slamming against the bars, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You feel the prince's heart lurch, his fingers tightening on the bread, as Marie vanishes into the shadows, her breath held tight. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to carry a truth too heavy to speak? The prince's scratches are a metaphor for identity as a fragile etch, carved against the tide of erasure. Marie's whispered words, her quiet defiance, are a healing thread, reminding him he's more than a secret. Have you ever felt silenced, your voice trapped by forces beyond your control? What small acts have kept your spirit alive? This prince's story is a mirror, showing us how silence can crush, but resilience can endure. Mantra: silence can drown the strongest heart. You stand in the cold, shadowed heart of Versailles, 1710, where the air feels like a clenched fist, tight with the weight of unspoken truths. The distant murmur of the court's violins drifts down, a cruel reminder of a world the nameless prince cannot touch. You imagine him in his cell, his almond-shaped eyes burning with a quiet fire, fixed on the iron bars that cage him. His heart is a smoldering coal, scarred by years of erasure, but glowing with a spark of rebellion. You feel his inner resolve hardening, a refusal to let his spirit be crushed. Who is he? This boy the king denies. What power lies in his silenced name? Marie, the servant with kind eyes, continues to risk everything, slipping him food and fragments of hope. Jacques, the guard, is a constant shadow, his loyalty to King Louis XIV as rigid as the bars, though his gaze falters when it meets the boys. You sense the prince's thoughts churning. If I am nothing, why do they fear me? His scratches on the cell floor, now a faint pattern of lines, mark not just time but defiance, a claim to a self the palace seeks to erase. A tense scene unfolds. Jacques, his face a mask of duty, pauses at the cell's bars, his keys silent for once. You stare too boldly, he says, his voice low, almost a warning. The prince rises, his thin frame taut, and meets Jacques' eyes. I'm still here, he says, his voice steady, each word a blade. Jacques flinches, his hand tightening on his sword. You're nothing but a shadow, he retorts, but his voice wavers, as if he doubts his own words. The air crackles with unspoken truths. The boys gaze a silent shout of existence, daring the guard to see him. The visual is electric. The cell's torchlight flickers, casting sharp shadows that frame the prince's defiant eyes, his gaunt face alight with resolve. His cloak, frayed and gray, hangs like a rebel's banner. Jacques' crimson uniform gleams, but his posture betrays unease, his hand hovering near his sword. The bars between them stand stark, iron glinting coldly. The soundscape blends the distant hum of a courtly minuet with the soft creak of Jacques' boots and the prince's steady breaths. A tense violin string underscores the moment, its note sharp and unyielding. A moment of lightness breaks through. Earlier, Marie had slipped the prince a small apple, whispering, "Jacques thinks he guards a ghost, not a boy." The prince had stifled a laugh, his eyes glinting with shared mischief, a fleeting rebellion against the gloom. But now, in this confrontation, tension reigns. Jacques steps closer, his shadow swallowing the torchlight. "Speak again, and you'll regret it," he warns, his voice a low growl. You feel the prince's heart pound, his hands clenching, yet his eyes hold steady, a silent vow not to break. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to defy a world that denies you? The prince's gaze is a metaphor for identity, as a spark that refuses to die, even under the weight of power. His defiance, quiet but fierce, is a healing thread, weaving strength from years of silence. Have you ever stood your ground, even when the world demanded your silence? This prince's courage, burning in his eyes, challenges us to see our own resilience. Will his spirit survive the king's shadow? Stay tuned to find out. Mantra. Eyes can shout what lips cannot. You stand beneath the cold silver glow of a Versailles night, 1710, where moonlight spills through a narrow window into the prince's cell, casting a pale veil over his shadowed world. The distant hum of the court has faded, replaced by the soft chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves beyond the palace walls. You imagine the nameless prince, his almond-shaped eyes catching the moonlight, reflecting a flicker of hope and dread. His heart is a locked chest, heavy with questions he dares not voice. What truth binds me here? What secret is worth my life? You feel his spirit teetering at a crossroads, torn between submission and a daring spark of defiance. Marie, the servant with weathered hands, remains his quiet beacon, her visits a lifeline in the dark. Jacques, the guard, patrols with a heavier step tonight, his silence laced with unease, as if he senses the weight of the secret he enforces. You sense the prince's thoughts racing. If I am nothing, Why does the moonlight find me? He clutches the embroidered cloth Marie gave him, its faded flower a fragile tether to a world that denies his name. His identity, though buried, is a whisper growing louder, demanding to be heard. A scene of conflict unfolds under the moon's watchful eye. Marie, her face pale in the dim light, whispers through the bars, "They say your birth threatened the throne." The prince's breath catches, his voice sharp. "Then why not kill me?" Marie's eyes widen, her voice trembling. "Because even kings fear some truths. Their words hang heavy, a revelation that shifts the air." Jacques appears, his shadow cutting through the moonlight. "No more secrets," he snaps, his voice low but unsteady, as if the truth burns him too. The prince grips the cloth, his eyes locked on Jacques, a silent challenge. The visual is haunting. The cell glows faintly with moonlight. The prince's face half lit, his eyes sharp with newfound resolve. The embroidered flower in his hands catches a silver gleam, a symbol of fragile hope. Marie's apron blends with the shadows, her figure small but defiant. Jacques's crimson uniform seems dulled by the night, his face tense with conflict. The soundscape weaves the soft hum of crickets, with the faint creak of the cell's bars and Jacques's heavy breaths. A delicate, mournful flute plays, its notes weaving through the scene like moonlight, carrying the weight of revelation. A moment of lightness pierces the tension. Earlier, Marie had whispered, "Jacques guards these bars like they're the gates of heaven." The prince had stifled a laugh, his eyes bright for a moment, a shared jest against the guard's stern vigil. But now, tension reigns. Jacques steps closer, his hand on his sword. "Speak again, and you'll wish you hadn't," he warns, his voice a low growl. You feel the prince's pulse race, his fingers tightening on the cloth, yet his gaze holds steady, a silent vow to face whatever truth awaits. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to uncover a truth that could destroy you? The prince's discovery is a metaphor for identity as a buried seed, breaking through stone to reach the light. Marie's whispered revelation, her courage in speaking it, is a healing thread, pulling the prince toward his own strength. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where knowing the truth meant risking everything? This prince's story reminds us that even in darkness, truth can illuminate a path forward. What lies beyond his cell? The answer waits in the shadows. Mantra. Truths buried in darkness always surface. You stand in the dim, suffocating cell of Versailles, 1710, where the air feels heavy with the weight of a truth newly unearthed. Moonlight lingers from the night before, a faint silver thread weaving through the bars, illuminating the nameless prince's almond-shaped eyes. You imagine his heart as a cracked mirror, reflecting fragments of a self he's beginning to reclaim. His thoughts churn with the revelation Marie whispered. His birth threatens the throne. Why? What power does his name hold? You feel his spirit stirring, no longer content to be a shadow, but reaching for a name buried beneath years of royal silence. Marie, the servant with kind eyes, remains his quiet guide, her visits a lifeline to a world beyond the bars. Jacques, the guard, patrols with a heavier tread, his face etched with conflict, as if the truth he guards gnaws at his loyalty. You sense the prince's resolve hardening, his fingers tracing the embroidered flower on the cloth Marie gave him, each stitch a reminder of his humanity. His identity, once a ghost, is now a spark flaring brighter, demanding to be named, even as the palace seeks to crush it. A scene of conflict unfolds. The prince, his voice low but steady, speaks to Marie through the bars. "If I'm a threat, I deserve to know my name," he says, his eyes fierce with purpose. Marie hesitates, her voice trembling. "Names are dangerous here," she whispers, glancing down the corridor. "But you're more than their secret." Jacques's boots echo, cutting through their words. "Enough," he growls, his hand gripping the bars. "You'll bring ruin on us all." The prince stands, unflinching, his gaze locking onto Jacques. "Then let it come," he says, each word a defiant claim to his existence. The visual is vivid. The cell's faint torchlight mingles with fading moonlight, casting a soft glow on the prince's face, his eyes alight with determination. The embroidered cloth in his hands, its red flower vibrant against the gray stone, stands as a symbol of his awakening. Marie's apron, worn but steadfast, catches a flicker of light, while Jacques's crimson uniform looms stark, his face torn between duty and doubt. The soundscape blends the distant hum of a courtly harp with the soft rustle of the cloth and the heavy clank of Jacques's keys. A resonant cello underscores the scene, its notes deep and defiant, echoing the prince's resolve. A moment of lightness breaks through. Earlier, Marie had slipped him a small pear, whispering, "Jacques thinks he guards a dragon, not a boy." The prince's lips had curved, a quiet laugh shared in the dark, a spark of defiance against their shared prison. But now, tension grips the air. Jacques leans closer, his voice a low threat. "You'll learn to stay silent," he warns, his hand on his sword. You feel the prince's heart race, his fingers tracing the flower, a silent vow to reclaim what was stolen. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to reclaim a self the world denies? The prince's defiance is a metaphor for identity as a seed breaking through stone, finding life despite the weight of power. Marie's courage, her whispered support, is a healing thread, stitching together the boy's fractured sense of self. Have you ever fought to reclaim a piece of yourself, a truth others tried to bury? This prince's journey shows us that even in the darkest cells, the human spirit can rise. His name, though hidden, is closer than ever. Mantra. A name reclaimed is a soul reborn. You stand at the edge of a new dawn in Versailles, 1710, where the first rays of sunlight pierce the narrow window of the nameless prince's cell, casting a golden thread across the stone floor. The distant clamor of the court, goblets clinking, voices rising, feels like a fading dream, drowned by the soft chirp of morning birds beyond the palace walls. You imagine the prince, his almond-shaped eyes catching the light, reflecting a quiet triumph. His heart is a battered sail, worn by years of confinement, but catching the wind of resilience. You feel his spirit, no longer a shadow, but a flame burning steady, fueled by the truth he's begun to reclaim. Marie, the servant with kind eyes, has been his anchor, her small acts of defiance weaving a lifeline through the darkness. Jacques, the guard, still patrols, but his steps are slower now, his face etched with doubt, as if the prince's defiance has cracked his loyalty to the king. You sense the prince's thoughts settling, no longer a storm, but a clear stream. I am more than their secret. I am alive. He clutches the embroidered cloth, its faded flower a symbol of his reclaimed humanity, its red petals bright against the gray of his world. His identity, once erased, now pulses with quiet strength. A final scene unfolds. Marie slips to the cell, her voice soft but fierce. "You're stronger than their lies," she says, passing a small key through the bars, a stolen promise of freedom. The prince's eyes widen, his voice steady. "I'll carry my name, whatever it is," he says, gripping the key. Jacques appears, his face pale, but he doesn't speak. For the first time, he turns away, letting the moment linger. The prince tucks the key beneath his cloak, his heart soaring with possibility. A silent vow to step into the light. The visual is radiant. The cell glows with dawn's golden light. The prince's face illuminated, his eyes bright with hope. The embroidered cloth, its flower vibrant, rests in his hands like a reclaimed banner. Marie's apron catches the sunlight, a symbol of her unwavering care, while Jacques' crimson uniform fades into the shadows, his figure small against the dawn. The soundscape weaves the soft trill of birds with the faint rustle of the cloth and the distant toll of a church bell. A gentle violin rises, its notes soaring with quiet triumph, carrying the promise of a new beginning. A moment of lightness lingers. Earlier, Marie had whispered, "Jacques' keys couldn't lock a henhouse now." The prince had laughed softly, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds, a final spark of shared defiance. But the tension has faded, replaced by hope. Jacques' silence, his choice to walk away, is a crack in the palace's walls, letting the prince dream of a world beyond. You feel his heart lift, the key a small, heavy promise in his hand, a step toward freedom. You pause to reflect. What does it mean to rise from erasure? The prince's journey is a metaphor for identity, as a flame that no cage can extinguish, a light that burns through the darkest secrets. Marie's courage, Jacques' faltering loyalty, and the prince's resilience weave a healing tapestry, reminding us that even under tyranny, the human spirit can triumph. Have you ever found strength to reclaim your own light after darkness? This prince's dawn is a mirror, showing us that scars can become stories of survival. Subscribe, like, and share to uncover more tales of resilience with us. Mantra: resilience turns shadows into light.